The chairperson of the South African National Editors Forum now, Sbu Ngalwa, to weigh in on the outcome of the Pietermaritzburg High Court setting aside private prosecution bid against Advocate Willie Downer and journalist Karyn Maughan. Thank you so much, Sbu, for your time this afternoon. Now, as SANEF, I would imagine that you are relieved with this judgment. Just give us your reaction.
No, certainly we think that this is a good day for journalism. I think we do believe that this is a victory for media freedom. We have always maintained that this case was nothing but a vindictive move to silence a journalist. And I think it's a victory not just for Karyn Maughan, but for all journalists in South Africa, because the court agrees with our main contention that this suit was about intimidation, it was about harassment, and also it was about silencing a journalist and making sure that former President Jacob Zuma is not criticized by the media in this country. And I think that the court vindicated us insofar as that is concerned. And I think that is actually quite important as we go into election season, because we know that emotions run high and political players tend to use journalists as scapegoats and also and target them for harassment and abuse. So I think this judgment also helps in sending a clear warning to other political players not to abuse processes and not to also abuse their stature in society and think that they will get away with it.
Now, throughout, of course, this case, we know, that the former president continued to argue that the NPA Act was breached when the state leaked a doctor's note to Karyn Maughan. Just talk to us about, about this particular matter, especially concerning that, this letter was in the court documents. It was public at that stage.
And that's exactly the point here, because the issue here, there's never, and I think that's what South Africans need to understand, because there's deliberate distortion and I would dare say lies, deliberate lies to smear journalists and create an impression that medical records were leaked. There was no leak of medical records. What was there was a letter, which was a basic letter, which said nothing about the condition of the president, which was submitted by the NPA as part of the court record to prove that the former president could not be in court because he was not well. Nothing was said about his condition. Nothing was said about where he was, who was treating him, or what he was treated for. And to report on that, in South Africa, courts are a public institution. Whatever is said in court is public unless if otherwise stated. For instance, if a child is giving evidence in camera where they cannot be identified and the court rules as such, you would have that. But there was no such a thing here. This letter actually was put on the record, not by anyone else, but by Zuma's lawyers. So this was always an abuse of process. And I think that's why the judgment went as far as awarding a cost order against the former president. So all that Karyn Maughan did was to report on a public document. What ended up as a public document, that's how we all know about it. So there's nothing confidential about it to begin with.
Broadly speaking, South Africa ranks high when it comes to media freedom. But just how close was this particular private prosecution, as well as other attempts to gag or to even threaten the work of media institutions and journalists in particular, in infringing media freedom? So
today we may celebrate this as a victory, but I think it is actually quite sad that the person who had brought this ridiculous charge is a former president, somebody who had put his hand up to swear by and to respect the constitution of this country. In fact, this judgment is actually very important because it actually restates the importance of media freedom of Section 16 of our constitution. Yes, South African media is free in comparison to other countries, but we do have warning signs in this country as well, including how journalists are treated when they turn up for protests or when they go to cover stories in various areas. So it does not end here, because we do know that politicians, when they are under pressure, when we shine the light on their wrongdoing, they turn around and they target journalists for smear campaigns to try and turn around the public sentiment towards journalists. So in as much as we may be free as the media in this country, we do face challenges when we go out and and cover stories in various areas. I mean, every day you hear stories and we issue statements about journalists being attacked, covering protests or covering community struggles, and that, I believe, and we believe, is not just an innocuous thing. It's a direct result of the disinformation and the fake news and disinformation campaigns that are driven largely by political players and influential players to try and sully the name of journalists and journalism. So that's why today was an important day. And I think that South Africans should understand this within that context, that this is not just a victory for Karyn Maughan, it's a victory for journalism, but also it's a victory for the rule of law and the constitution in South Africa.